What are the best forms of exercise set children up to be both skillful and athletic in the future? Should we be copying the training of elite teams like Limerick hurlers, Armagh or Dublin footballers? Or what about looking at the training of different individuals such as Usain Bolt or Cristiano Ronaldo and copying what they do in the gym, on the track, on the pitch or in their own individual sessions? All the training they're doing now might be the right exercise for them to do at their particular stage of development and age. But realistically, looking back to when they were children, they were doing far different training that set them up for the long term. Because it's obvious, in their current level of skill, they clearly developed a really good range of fundamental movement skills. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What fundamental movement skills are, why they're important, and how you can develop them in your own children or the children you're currently coaching. Fundamental movement skills are the building blocks to all forms of athletic movement and the majority of sport-specific skills that you want to develop somewhat later in life. They include various movements like running, jumping, throwing and catching, and can generally be divided into three different categories, namely locomotor, where you're trying to get your body to move with a certain element of control around it, both on one leg, two legs, or whatever the case may be. Stability, where you're trying to stop your body from moving or control it, having performed a movement prior to that. Or manipulative, where you're trying to move or control something external to your body, normally something like a ball. Why are fundamental movement skills important? Let's use an analogy from a core subject that we're taught in school. We'll use maths as an example. You can see on screen a few typical questions that may be asked in a junior cert. When 4 or 5-year-olds start in primary school, rock up in junior infants, you don't just give them those junior cert questions and say, work on these until you can solve them. We layer up to that through a series of incremental tasks where they learn the absolute basics and build up to being able to do more complex tasks, such as what we just looked at. For example, we generally get them to start off counting or even identifying the numbers first, then move on to addition and subtraction before going to multiplication and division, then long multiplication, long division before we start adding in various letters and symbols that often lead to serious confusion. If you think of a 6-year-old and you throw an X, a Y, an A, a B or a C into their maths questions, they get really confused because it's just too advanced for them. It can be somewhat similar when we look at really sport specific skills. Like we shouldn't really jump straight in with sideline cuts or hook kicks or dummy solos because they're just a little bit too advanced. We really need to focus on some of the building blocks or foundational skills that build up to those or combine together to allow us to perform those skills a little bit later in life. That's not to say we shouldn't expose them to them in some form. It's still great to see more experienced players, older siblings or players on TV performing all those skills to give them something to work towards, but realistically we shouldn't really be focused on them under 6s or under 8s. We should try to develop those core fundamental movement skills and layer the more sport specific hurling and football stuff on top of that. We've previously discussed the importance of fundamental movement skills and how they can be important for both setting children up, play a number of sports as they get older and be somewhat successful in all those, particularly in conversation with P.T. Shaw, and also when I spoke to Carol Dillon about the importance of developing really skillful players across both sides or bilaterality and how important fundamental movement skills can be in laying a foundation for being really good off both sides, in both hurling and football. But how do they actually contribute to being more skillful and to giving you more opportunities to play a number of sports? Let's take a look at an example, and we're going to use the handpass and hurling here, but you can apply the same to a number of skills across hurling, football, camogie or LGFA. So let's just think for a second of how a hand pass is performed in hurling. And I don't just mean performed in isolation, but let's see how it's performed in the context of the game and how it will contribute in a positive way to how the game is unfolding or where it's actually used in realistic terms. Briefly pause this video and try and make a list of how many different fundamental movement skills from the table shown on screen to see are important and relevant to successful execution of a hand pass. Now some of these might be stretching it a little bit, but let's be realistic and see how it can actually fit in. So the obvious ones are throwing and striking with the hand. For successful execution, you're going to hope that the receiver is going to catch the ball, so that ties in catching. And because we're rarely just doing it, standing there receiving a ball no one around, there's probably going to be some form of dodging or sidestepping there as well. As we want to do it while moving up the pitch, running is going to be included, and maybe if it's not that accurate, might have to jump and land, and that's going to tie in landing, balancing and jumping and or hopping included as well. That's a list of 9 different fundamental movement skills, all applied to one of the simplest tasks in hurling once it's in the context of the game. How many more are going to be important for any of the other skills you could list off, either for hurling or football? Now that we've looked at the various skills, we've seen why they're important, it's time to start putting together a plan around how we can best develop these in children. I've touched before on Lloyd's YPD model, you can see it on screen, and you notice that fundamental movement skills are ideally developed between the ages of 5 and 9. But just look at this bit down here. This suggests that they should be developed, or the majority of movement skills in children should be developed with a low structure. What does that mean? That's suggesting we don't want too much specific teaching or drills or isolating what it is we want to develop, but more so done in a little bit more of a chaotic or ideally fun environment. And one of the best ways to do this is through a series of games. Developing a lot of these skills through games bring a number of benefits. Number one, it's going to develop skills in a fun way. So children are more likely to want to come back and play them more and more, and also do maybe in their own free time in a slightly more organic way. The other big benefit is that they'll ideally develop some game sense. They'll understand maybe what it means to move into a little bit of space, to find the pass that's on, to make the decision on whether to run and carry or lay off the ball. Particularly in hurling, because some of the skills can be a little bit more complex, the ticket to entry in terms of skill level to play your first game and make a meaningful contribution is reasonably high, particularly in comparison to other sports. In younger children, pulling out some of the specific elements of hurling and allowing them to play other games like Olympic handball, allowing them to develop some of the various bits of decision making and game sense that are required that they can still apply to hurling once they develop those skills, but are brought alongside the development of those skills maybe a little bit more in isolation, while they improve their ability to understand somewhat what's happening in a game, how they can learn to exploit and defend bits of space that naturally occur when games are played. It's key here to try and encourage the use of skills they can already do, like throwing and catching or kicking, but applying them into games that require elements of decision making or choice, or just the players having to think a little bit on their own, and then maybe focusing more on some of the sport specific skills that they may not be able to execute in a game context, but practice those a little bit in isolation, and then over time look to combine the two elements together. Ideally, the more skills you can execute, the more options you have available. But we also need to practice identifying and choosing options while also developing skills. We shouldn't wait till we have all of the skills learned, then apply them to games. Ideally, we want to bring both along together. Some really good options here, particularly younger players, are Olympic handball, any number of variations of tag, relay races, obstacle courses, or target games to try and develop some elements of throwing, kicking and striking. Can all be really fun for young players, but will also help develop those skills that will further feed into the more sport specific ones we want them to be able to perform, particularly in the teenage years and when they get to adulthood. Personally, I really like the use of stations for this approach, where you might focus on one sport specific skill, such as roll lifting the ball in hurling, or the hook kick in Gaelic football at one stage, and then you move on to slightly more organic development of throwing and catching, such as in a game of Olympic handball at the next station, before going back into something more sport specific again, or a little bit more of an athletic development focus, like hopping, jumping, skipping, through different relay races or tag games. If you're looking for some suggestions around how you can start incorporating fundamental movement skills in your underage training practices, then you'll get a link to 10 fundamental movement skill based sessions below. And for more information on athletic development for young people, have a look at this video up here.